We're ready. All right. Okay, so let's begin. Well, for all who are here, many thanks for being here. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you this afternoon on a topic that I am really passionate about and excited to share with you. And this is a topic which was drawn from you, our audience, and some former audience members. And there was a real hunger for some direct and tactical advice on how to master influencer marketing. And this is a bit of a masterclass into what we've learned at Tailify about what it takes. And in particular, what are the three biggest challenges in influencer marketing and how can you overcome them? To begin, I'd like to begin with a presencing exercise so that you can get the most out of your time and attention here. So if you would, just close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Feel your belly rise and fall, deep diaphragmatic breaths. And allow whatever thoughts you are having in this moment to just be as they are, so you can bring your full attention to listening and bringing something new to this conversation. And bring to mind the intention that you had for joining. When you signed up for this webinar, you had an idea, a spark, something that you thought was important. State that in your mind as an intention. I am here for, and then fill in the blank. And then listen from that space, from that commitment that you've just made. And you might be surprised what you hear that you might not otherwise have heard. Here's what you can expect by the end of this webinar. 2 outcomes. First, you will know your challenges, and you will know them analogically, and you will know them logically. It'll just make sense what influencer marketing is and why it's so challenging. And importantly, you will also get your tools. You will have some of the tools to surmount these challenges. So who am I to be talking with you about this today? Well, I'm by no means an expert, but I hope I've got a bit of a distinctive perspective on this. So I started my career at Yale at LSE, where I studied cognitive sciences at Yale and decision sciences at the London School of Economics. And I did my dissertation with a company called SEL, who's the parent company of Cambridge Analytica, where I used psychology and data science to build technology to predict the next Arab Spring. And that technology, it turns out, was very similar to the technology that could use not just to predict revolutions, but to create revolutions, and may or may not have been co-opted by Cambridge Analytica, which is the sister company of SEL, or a child company of SEL, not the one that I was in, but another one that is working on, of course, elections. So I've been trying to redeem myself for that by trying to build data and psychology, which makes the world a better place since then. So I built a chatbot life coach powered by IBM Watson for a company called Visual DNA, a values assessment powered by a visual search quiz. I built out the data science team at Trainline. If you've used a BusyBot or price prediction or anything smart on the Trainline app before it was harder to travel, I had a hand in that. And then I worked for a company called Huma, where I was trying to, among other things, predict your likelihood of osteoporosis from your gait data gathered from your iPhone as you walk. So trying to bring together the worlds of data science and psychology, or really whatever you can learn from that data to try and make human life better. And I joined Tailify about 6 months ago, and it has been the culmination of everything that I love about software and product and data and psychology. And I hope to share it'll become clear why later in this presentation. And so I bring this kind of perspective from this kind of background to the problem of how to do influencer marketing well. So why is this an important problem? So this is why every brand needs to master influence marketing. And in 2 words, it's rising CPAs. A lot of clients that we have come to us because they have this challenge. They're seeing their cost per acquisitions rise, even through channels that were once very profitable, such as Google and Facebook. And of course, they were always becoming pricier with the mass media channels, but those sources of cheap customers seem to have dried up or seem to be drying up for a lot of our clients. And so influencer marketing seems to be a new area which could potentially be that new source of customers. But it's important to understand why rising CPAs are the phenomenon that they are in order to understand why influencer marketing is so important. So why high CPAs? Well, in a nutshell, there's three trends that are driving this. One is choice overload. The internet and digitization of products have increased not only the number of options that you have for any given choice, from toothpaste to consumer goods to insurers to all manner of choices, but also the number of choices which you now have to make. So many more things that used to just be decided for you are now decisions which are available to you. And human beings just don't have the cognitive capacity to be really good at making all of those choices all at once. Our brains have not changed with the internet. So we rely increasingly on proxy decision makers. Another phenomenon is source proliferation. It used to be that you just heard, if we go all the way back to the tribal days, you were just getting information from your immediate family and then from your tribe, usually the chieftains. And then with mass media, you started being able to get information from broader sources, but it would still largely be the same authorities. You'd have the BBC in the UK, the NBC in the US. And then with social media, you started getting more and more voices that you could easily access, more and more sources of information. And what's changed now is that it's now become professional. It's now become viable for hundreds and millions of people to make their living simply being a voice on social media. So the number of valuable voices to listen to has expanded absolutely exponentially. So we rely more on proxy decision makers, and we have way more proxy decision makers we can rely on. The third thing driving this shift towards influence is the collapse of trust in the mainstream. And this is the thing which is really shifted in just the last couple of years. And I want to highlight this graph because it's really important. In short, people don't really trust big tech anymore. It used to be people didn't just trust the mainstream, which has also declined precipitously in the last few years, 20% in the last 5 years, which is the biggest drop in measured history of the survey. But big tech is also becoming less and less trusted. So who is there left to trust? Well, the same people we used to trust, which is to say people. And these three trends together create what I call the influence economy, or what we call the influence economy, which is an economy that revolves around people with influence, which is the scarcest resource that you need to do business. It doesn't matter if you have the best product in the world if you don't have people who consumers trust, who can be a bridge from that product to their minds. And increasingly, they have more decisions to make. So those decision makers, those proxy decision makers and influencers are even more important. CPAs will continue to rise, we predict, across all channels that are not influence, that are not trusted channels. And if you want to connect your product to consumers, you have to go through channels of trust. Enter the influence economy. It is already here, and all brands must learn to navigate it. So I want to shift the analogy from mountaineering, which has been the metaphor landscape that we've been dancing in for the last few minutes, into an analogy which I think will be a really helpful way to understand how influencer marketing really works, and to give you a new sense for it. So influence marketing is a lot like the dating game. It's a lot like finding love. First off, it's exhausting. If you've been dating in the modern age, you'll know that it's a lot of efforts to keep looking and to keep searching and to keep having conversation. It takes a lot out of people, but it's all worth it when you find the one. I've got a few pictures from my wedding here just because I thought it'd be weird to show other people's wedding pictures, but I'm happily married, so I'll give myself as a little bit of an example here. So taking it from the love game to, well, influencer marketing, I'd say most brands are on Tinder. Most brands are playing the hookup game and not living happily ever after. For instance, this is a pretty typical case. One of our clients came in and they shared with us the data from the influencer campaigns they had run before they started working with us. So they had done just over 250 influencer collaborations, and this is a graph of all of those collaborations they had done on the x-axis with the ROI of those collaborations those produced. Or ROI is the measured number of sales, measured amount of revenue that those influencers generated compared to the amount that was paid for them. And as you can see, it's a pretty egregious power curve. And to give you a sense of just how egregious it is, less than 7.5% are profitable. The rest are neutral or unprofitable by measurement. And over 15%, double that, were total busts, which is to say you pay an influencer $1,000 and they deliver exactly 0 sales. And the average ROI across all the influencers was negative 54%. Now, this doesn't seem like a particularly attractive channel on its face, does it? But there are some bright spots. The top 1% contributed over 51% of the ROI. So, you know what? Sometimes they get lucky. And just like when you're at a roulette wheel, if you get lucky every so often, you're inclined to keep playing. It's just the way that the mind is designed to work. So this is still not a particularly exciting kind of, well, these are not particularly exciting results if you're looking at it. And yet you can't ignore it, because those who do get lucky consistently become category leaders. Dollar Shave Club, for instance, who built their empire on not only great videos, but also social media and working with influencers, went from 0 to $1 billion acquisition by Unilever in 5 years. Gymshark, a player in an otherwise commodified sportswear brand, used influencers and elite athletes to grow from 0 to 400 million in 7 years, almost exclusively on the back of influencer marketing. And Kylie Jenner, of course, on the back of her own social media following, started with her following, then built a brand for that following, and became the youngest billionaire in 5 years. So what if it's not just luck? What are brands who are winning doing right? What are brands who are finding love and are living happily ever after in this game of winning influence actually doing correctly? Well, bringing it back to the mountaineering analogy, here are the 3 biggest challenges in influencer marketing. And I'll just lay them out. It's the 3 steps. First, there's influencer selection, finding the right influencers to work with. Then there's influencer collaboration, working with these influencers to produce amazing and effective creative. And then finally, there's ROI measurement. To make this really clear and to give you a visceral sense of it, and the way I'm going with this narrative is, these are also the 3 biggest challenges in love. First, there's finding someone worth going out with. Then there's dating that person and nurturing the relationship. And then there's the big decision. Should I stay or should I go? So let's start with finding love, which as an influencer, as in dating, is not particularly easy when it comes to influencer selection. Now, for a sense of why it's hard, I want to present a comparison. According to Investopedia, there are 630,000 global securities, which are, well, stocks you can buy around the world. That seems like a lot. And we haven't yet figured out the problem of finding the right stocks or the right mix of stocks such that, you know, everyone has this constantly growing portfolio. It still feels like a bit of a crapshoot, although it's a crapshoot with better odds than actual craps. But let's now look at the number of global influencers in the world. There's, by the measure of one social search tool, which is a pretty good social search tool, 100 million influencers at least. That is over 2 orders of magnitude more. But it gets even worse than that. That if I buy a share of Apple, and if you buy a share of Apple, it really doesn't matter who bought it. You know, the stock goes up and down. But if I do a brand collaboration with Apple, with my tech background and my wearing of a turtleneck, you know, I'm aligned with Apple, and I might do a little bit better. And you, who may have an even better turtleneck, may do even better than me. So it's a matchmaking game, which isn't the case with stocks. Who you are makes a huge difference for whether an influencer is going to be effective, which is not the case with stocks, which creates this incredible combinatorial explosion of incredible complexity and figuring out who the hell you should work with, because you need to know so much. And if it hasn't been solved for stocks, well, influencers, it's going to be challenging as well. to put it another way, you don't have time to go on 100 million first dates. So let's think about if you were trying to do this well for love, what would you do? Well, it helps to make two lists. First, what are your deal breakers? If you were trying to find love, you'd write down what are the things that if these weren't met, the relationship just wasn't going to work. So they need to be in the same city. They need to be in a compatible age range. If faith, for instance, is important to you, they need to share your core values. If those aren't there, the relationship just isn't going to work. Nothing else could really make up for that. And then you have your preferences. These are things which you want, but if they didn't have them and they had something else you liked, it could still work. So you might have a preference for someone who's tall, you might have a preference for someone with high income, and you might have a preference for someone who shares some of your interests, like someone who likes pets. Note that to make these lists, it requires some self-inquiry. You have to know not only what's important to you, but the content of what's important to you. Namely, what are your core values? Like, who are you really? What's really important to you? And we think that selecting influencers should be taken with the same care that you would take when you are selecting a potential partner, which is, of course, what these influencers are. They are your partners in a deeper sense than merely economic partners. So here are our 3 steps for selecting great matching influencers. Step 1 is to reflect. Know thyself, as Plato said. So there are 3 important questions you really need to ask yourself. 1, what values does your brand stand for? Why does your brand exist? 2, what does your product really help people do? Think about what are the key use cases for which someone would use the product to get value out of it and then, well, pay for it and or share it. What does it really help people do? And then why are you doing this in the first place? Get really clear on your strategic objectives. Where are you trying to grow? How quickly are you trying to grow? How much money are you willing to put into this? How important is this channel to you? If you know these up front, it's going to make things a lot easier. Now, at Tailify, there are a few ways that we elicit the answers to these questions. One is that we do a strategy workshop upfront before signing anything to understand your answers to these questions and then to put together a proposal that would help. You can ask these questions, of course, of yourself. The other thing that we do, which is useful, is we administer some psychometric tests because it helps to know what you stand for psychometrically. You may have a sense of what brand values you stand for through your own decks on your brand guidelines. But then how do you know that an influencer is going to match with those? Because the way that you talk about your values may not be the way that influencers talk about their values. So it helps to understand whether an influencer and yourselves are going to be a good values fit to be able to measure the values of your brand and the values of an influencer in comparable terms with the same scale, with the same score, so you can easily do that matching. So what we do is we use a test called the Values Compass, which we have adapted with one of our partners, a professor out of the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And it's a test by which we use to elicit the values of your brand, and then we administer that same test to potential influencers, and we use it as an input to understand whether someone is really a great fit. So this is the output of one of those tests, and it measures these values. And this is an output which we delivered for one of our brands. So this is one thing it helps with. There are many tests of values which you can use. This is just one we found is particularly good for predicting performance. So step 2, once you've reflected and you know yourself, is to map out your partner evaluation criteria. And this is one way that we have documented our partner evaluation criteria, our deal breakers and our preferences. So to give a sense of what yours might look like if you were to write it out, it helps to write it out as a tree because that's just logically how it ends up going. So you might want to write down your list of deal breakers. Here are some of the deal breakers that are important for us. So we call these non-compensatory factors because no other factors would compensate if these weren't true. So we look at geography. So make sure that you're targeting influencers who have audiences in the right geographies for your product. The demographics have to be relevant. If you're targeting something towards old people or young people, of course, that has to fit. The product has to be relevant, which means there has to be an overlap between the promise of the product and the topics that are discussed on a particular channel, and you might want to weight those topics by engagement. So the influencer is talking most and getting the most response out of particular topics, resonate with the topics that your product is relevant for. Of course, the influencer has to be available, has to have not worked with a competitor, and they have to be within a reasonable price range. They have to be in that conversation. And then there are the compensatory factors. Now, we look at things like attention. Does the influencer have enough attention? We're looking at average views, their views to subscriber ratio, how consistent those views are, which indicates audience loyalty. We're looking at the number of subscribers which that influencer has. And of course, we look at factors of trust. We look at their character, their authenticity, which we measure by value congruence, the strength of their values, how frequently a creator shows their face, a sign of vulnerability, their sponsorship history, comment relevance of their of audiences to their posts, which is an indication of audience health, influencer interaction, the reliability as indicated by post consistency and recency, and of course the competence of that influencer, how much authority does that influencer have in this particular topic. We also look at the quality of that influencer's relationship with their audience, the likes to views ratio, and very importantly, does the audience interact with each other on their posts rather than just interact with the influencer? That suggests there's a community and not just an audience which is just all looking up, or they're talking across one another. And we're also looking at exogenous factors like topic trendiness and brand reputation. So these are all important factors. Some of them can be gathered quantitatively. Others you need to actually look at the influencers and look at their content to understand are these really going to work for you. Some you do have to date, so to speak. And then finally, there's searching, filtering, and shortlisting. So this is an example from one social search tool. And if you look at the column in the middle or at the row in the middle, you can see some of the filters which have been applied. In short, you start with the compensatory filters. So these are, or sorry, the non-compensatory filters. These are the deal breakers, the things which just have to be true. So of the 100 million influencers, just looking at the influencers who have sufficient audience, for instance, in the United Kingdom, this is an example of a client that we worked with earlier who was in the feminine product business. They were building a fertility tracker. And so there were some pretty strict criteria that we needed to start with that would make an influencer even relevant. They're looking at the UK, so of course they need to have an audience in the UK, needed to speak English, they needed to be largely female, and they needed to be largely in a range where they were, well, in their menstrual range, so pre-menopause, post-puberty. And to try and narrow down at relevance, we were looking at influencers who had talked about women's health in their bios. So that narrowed down significantly the possible influencers to a range that were potentially considerable. And then we went through each of these influencers one by one to try and understand, were they going to be a good fit by all the factors which we had looked earlier. We kind of predated them, so to speak. Now, what you might find in doing this is that there's still too many influencers. You know, there's over 100 influencers that we found even after we narrowed down to all of these things. And you probably are not going to have budget to afford all of them. So, you know, it takes a lot of time to go through those. And given the budgetary constraints, you know, how accurate are you really going to be in assessing those criteria like relevance to your product, like inter-audience, like the audience health, for instance. So the next frontier for doing this really well is using artificial intelligence to find high ROI influencers for your brand, though you can still very much do it manually. And what you're trying to do when you're using AI, or really any kind of intelligence, is you're trying to predict something. You're trying to predict, what are the potential sales if I were to collaborate with this influencer? That's the output. And then you have this input, which is there's this information about the brand, which you know about yourself from step 1, and about the influencers, which you've known by researching in step 3. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to use your own brain to map these inputs and these outputs to try and understand, based on that information about the brand of the influencer, what are the potential sales. And that is an operation that your brain does. But it's an operation that an artificial brain or a computer could also do very, very well. And this is one of the things that we are doing at Tailify. We're using the historical data from the over 200 campaigns that we've run in the past and the know-how which we've built up over running these campaigns within our team to build an artificial brain, to build an AI, which is able to predict the potential sales given an influencer client pairing. And that's one of the things that certainly helps us when we're doing this work for clients. You can, of course, build your own AI, or you can just use your own brains, which is slower, but also can work quite well, of course. So that's influencer selection in a nutshell. Next comes dating. You found your influencers. You think they're hot. You think they're going to be great for your brand. How do you transform this from you two are strangers into a productive relationship? And that's the challenge of influencer collaboration. Now, getting an influencer attention is non-trivial. Believe it or not, the average collaboration acceptance rate is only 25%. Now think about it. If you were to find some influencers which you thought were amazing, let's say you found 10 of them, if only 2 of them actually accept your invitation, well, that's really going to hurt your chances of having a high ROI campaign, which of course does require several influencers. So this is a non-trivial problem. And even once you get someone to accept, well, here's why it's important and hard. The right influencer with the wrong creative is still wrong. For example, this is an influencer from a recent campaign that we did, a guy named Pavel out of Germany, and he was doing a promotion for Fiverr. And he's a great influencer. He talks a lot about photography, and he had a great concept, which is to have people on Fiverr produce a promotional film for his own agency so that other photographers who follow him, professional photographers and videographers, could potentially use Fiverr as well as a way of outsourcing some of the work which they'd rather not do. But he titled it as "We Have an Advertising Film Produced by Fiverr." Now, of course, what he meant was we have used Fiverr to produce an advertising film for our own firm. However, you read that and it sounds like this is a promotional video for Fiverr. It sounds like an ad, and it's not, but it sounds like an ad. And so this got incredibly low engagement, even for him, and was a major loss. So it didn't have to be that way. But thanks to the nature of the collaboration, it didn't work out that way. So we learned from that. And it's important that you learn from that, because if you get this wrong, it can absolutely, well, to take it back to dating, a bad first date can ruin a relationship's potential. It didn't have to be this way, but someone put their foot in their mouth, and that's what happened. But it can be great. But it's important to understand how it cannot. So some brands, for instance, come on too strong. So for example, if you as a brand are really committed to using the influencer in a certain way, you've got a strong script because you want all your marketing across all your channels to be talking from the same hymn sheet. Well, influencers might not want to sing that song, and then influencers might be repelled or produce creative, which is just going to be mindless and soulless and isn't going to be good for your campaign or for themselves. The other side of the spectrum is other brands can come on too weak. You can just say, oh, just make something for us. We love you so much. And an influencer will just take it in whatever direction they want, and it may be in a way which is bad for your brand. And that unfortunately does happen. So don't be a doormat, but don't be on top of your influencer either. The best who are at this, balance strength with granting space. Just like in a good date, you want to be very clear about who you are and what's important to you. And then within that space, give the person that you are engaging with the chance to fully be themselves. And that's a recipe for a great relationship. Bringing it to influencer marketing, here are the 3 steps that we use for a successful influencer collaboration. So step 1, and these mirror the steps of the actual collaboration, the very important pieces of communication which you have to get right is outreach like you value them. This is the asking an influencer or an asking a person out stage. And this is the part where you really want to do better than 25%. So reach out to your first contact to potential partners. Make that first contact count by acknowledging a specific piece of content and what you liked about that. If you just have a generic outreach, which shows that you don't really care about them, or if you pay attention to superficial features like, hey, you've got a pretty face, want to go out, it's unlikely the influencer will feel that you're genuine, and they're unlikely to respond. So it helps to acknowledge a specific feature about them which you like and which is particularly relevant to you. And this is the bridge. So say what values you sense they share with your brand. I see that you created this piece of content. I thought this was brilliant. This suggests that you really care about this. Our brand really cares about this too. And here's why, here's what we do. And here's how our brand's product could help your audience do what they came here to do. Every influencer has an audience who is watching them for a particular reason. They are there to get something for themselves and their life. And when that reason that an influencer exists for the audience overlaps with the reason that you exist for your customers, that is when you have great potential. And when you speak from that understanding up front, you're much more likely to get a positive response. The second piece of advice is to brief with commander's intent, not boss's orders. Now, when we talk about the brief, this is the creative brief, which is the piece of communication that you send out once an influencer has agreed to work with you. And to distinguish this distinction of commander's intent, it means that the more your agent understands the purpose behind what must be done, the better he or she will do it. This is the adage that, tell your men to take a hill, not to trudge up 30 meters, then take a left, go around that tree, and so on. Because if something happens, or if you didn't get the location of that tree right, your men are likely to get lost. So be really clear about the goal and leave unconstrained the how is the principle here. Now, what that means here is you want to be clear on the fixed parts of your campaign, the parts which just have to be so in order for this to work. So that's got to be what your brand stands for, because your brand's values aren't changing, what your product can do. Importantly, what are your hopes for the campaign? What do you want to happen? Enroll the creator, the influencer, and what you hope to happen, the impact that you hope to have on audience members. And any learnings from previous collaborations which might provoke success and avoid disaster. You've learned a lot from these campaigns, hopefully, and if you haven't, then you'll start. And you want to bring them in as a team member, as a partner, share, this is what's worked before, this is what has really engaged audiences before, but of course, this is inspiration for you. And clear thing to do is don't head influencers your ad copy. Don't make them read a script and expect them to follow it, because they're experts on their audience and what kind of creative concepts would appeal to them. These are not billboards. They're not pay for play. And those that are not going to be particularly good value for money, because their audiences can already smell that. And the third piece of advice, the third step here, is the feedback with radical candor. So hopefully your influencers will be submitting their creative to you for approval before you actually publish it. And this is a great time to intervene to make sure that you don't have problems like we had with Pavel, who had a title that was just not going to work or not going to show the content in the best light. So radical candor. This is a specific term from a book that you may or may not have read. It's a lovely book. I recommend it. It's a communication paradigm that was designed for giving feedback in an effective way. So radical candor is based on this idea that there are these two distinctions by which you can distinguish all communication. So all communication comes in the spirit of you either care personally about the person you're talking to or you don't, and you either challenge them directly, you're straight with them, or you don't. You're kind of vague. And this is a bit of a matrix. So if you don't care and you don't challenge, then you are just manipulatively insincere, and that's not going to work very well. But if you do challenge, but it's clear that you don't care personally, you're just being obnoxiously aggressive, and that person is not likely to hear you. This is coming on too strong. If you really care, but you're not really direct with them, then they're not really going to hear the message, and this is what we call ruinous empathy. But when you are direct and you care, then you have what's called radical candor, which really works. So the key here is to establish that you care, because early in a relationship, that is not obvious. So when reviewing creator content before posting, show that you care personally, especially by acknowledging the creative effort behind it. Said, I really like these elements. I thought these were good. This is a test of respect for the creator and an essential milestone in a developing partnership, because creators by their nature are sensitive. They're sensitive beings. They constantly put themselves out there every single day. My wife is a YouTuber. I actually have to filter through the comments that she gets on YouTube, because it affects her so much when she receives a negative comment, because she's putting out her face, her identity there every single week. And if you don't respect that, and it's so easy to forget that creators are sensitive people, then you're just likely to have them shut down, and you're going to miss an opportunity to produce really great creative. If you can show that you care, then you have the space to challenge them directly and to fix mistakes, which might otherwise show your brand in a not so positive light. So here's a case study about how this worked. This is an example of an influencer called Damon Dominique, who we worked with a language learning application that you have probably heard of, but I will not mention their name. But they're one of the largest language learning apps in the world. So we reached out to them, and we loved how their work, or how his work, really appealed to language learners who were beginners, in particular to Americans who have a fascination with language learning because they don't naturally grow up learning many languages. So we then asked them to say, hey, we've seen 1 to 2 minute integrations work well for previous influencers. He said, no, I'm not going to do that at all. Trust me. We said, okay. So what he did is he made this amazing full-length video incorporating the client's product as a character in his story, that he made this product he talked to it, he made it part of his daily routine, and he basically saw how much German could he learn using this product while he was living in Germany over the course of a week. And it was an amazingly successful collaboration. We paid for £4,000 for this particular collaboration, and he returned, 4,000 euros, and he returned 60,000 euros. That's a 15x ROI. You do that consistently, you have an incredibly, incredibly profitable channel. And that's what a really great successful inter-collaboration works. You are facilitating a love story between a brand and a creator. And now that that relationship has been established, there's the opportunity to do many more collaborations beyond that. So, step 3, how do you know this person is the one? This is my wife reading her vows, and I very much knew at this moment that she was the one. But how did I know that? Well, I had some measures. I had some ways of knowing that that this was a relationship that I most certainly wanted to continue. So to understand the nature of ROI measurement, it helps to think about an iceberg, because like an iceberg, the full impact of influencer collaboration is quite difficult to measure. What's obvious are these directly tracked and attributed metric uplifts, and these metrics can vary depending on whether you're doing top of funnel or bottom funnel, and so we'll get into that on the next slide. But there's a lot more here. There's the untracked metric uplift. So this is what influencer marketing has moved that you can't directly attribute to a particular collaboration or to influencer marketing as a channel in general, or at least that's not easy without tools. And then there's the long-term impact on the brand, social proof, and evergreen conversion. So the key thing about this content, particularly on YouTube, but on Instagram as well, is that you are buying a slot for all time. When you put out a Google ad, you pay for every second that it's up. But when you do a collaboration, that is evergreen content. As long as that is relevance, and for instance, that thing with Damon still gets views and still gets conversions to this day, that is going to continue paying money day after day after day after day after day. But that impact isn't always easy to measure because there's a long time window there. So the full impact is hard to measure. To bring it back to the dating analogy, in love, the obvious can also distract us from the important, and it's really important not to be distracted by the obvious. So you look at a guy like this, and he looks like he could be a catch. He's got a prestigious job, he's a doctor, of course, he's great looking, look at those eyes. But, once you get to know him a little bit, you understand he's a little bit narcissistic, and relationships with narcissists don't tend to go particularly well. And even worse, he doesn't leave the toilet seat down. Does he really care about you? Well, you have to look at those factors. And if you were to make a lifelong decision based upon the obvious factors rather than the unobvious but important, that's not going to be a successful relationship either. You might be putting a lot of time and energy in something which is not really going to give you a return. So let's talk about all the metrics universe, the top of the iceberg and the bottom of the iceberg. So first, top of the iceberg. For top of funnel campaigns, there are 2 main campaigns you could be running in influencer marketing. One are top of funnel campaigns, which are primarily aimed at generating awareness, and then there are bottom of funnel campaigns or full funnel campaigns, which are meant to actually generate sales directly. So the basic tracking that you're looking for is you're looking for reach, which are impressions for Instagram, reviews for YouTube, and there's an analogy in every platform. and engagement. So once people see it, how do they respond to it? Do they like it? Do they comment? Do they share it? And any other meaningful interaction that might be native to a particular platform. These are the key metrics whenever direct conversions are not prioritized. And they're key because you can always measure them. You can see for this particular influencer who's doing a campaign for an energy drink, you can see he's got over 1,000 likes. He's got 242 comments. So this is a reasonable, well, for the size of his audience, this is pretty good engagement. Now, it's important that you also get first-party metrics through the influencer directly or through API authorization. So, for instance, he did a lot of stories for us, this particular influencer, and these story metrics, the engagement with those stories is not, you can't track that in a third-party way. This influencer has to share that with you. Now, if you're using a platform, the influencer can hit a button to authorize that platform to share those first-party stats, and then those get fed in. Else, you're going to have to ask the influencer to tell you what those stats were. And when you were looking at reach, for instance, CPM can be compared with other channels to compare costs, but engagements cannot. And so there's this classic question, what is the value of a like? So you can benchmark this, and there's some public databases to do that, how much of likes been worth for other people. But the best way to do this would be to run an analysis to understand what that actually looks like for you. So look at how your likes and your engagements correlate, at least in time, with overall sales during that period. And you can start to get a rough estimate about what these things are worth to you if you're not tracking sales directly. Just a little insight that we've learned from our own data is that when we were looking at engagement data and how that correlated with performance data, namely conversions, people actually buying from influencers, we saw that the number of views per comment proved the highest correlation with conversion in our data set. So audience interaction in the form of commenting seems to be the closest, the most significant metric of engagement, which predicted actual sales in our case. So if you're going to track one metric, I would suggest tracking comments for your posts, but all of them could potentially be important. So look at all of them as well. Now, if you want to get fancy and you want to look long-term, have a look at, you could run a study, and this would be a study on the particular creative produced for this campaign. So this is one such study you could run. This is with a company called Element Human out of London, which we can pay to have a look at how your audience interacts with your content on a psychometric level. So they could measure the attention that was paid to this particular content, what parts of the content were attended to, what was their emotional response. And we get this by having these individuals take a quick survey after reviewing these creative. And in that survey, they are also asked to show their camera and to track their face, and then an expression tracking algorithm measures the expressions of their face as they're looking at this particular piece of creative, so you understand what their emotional response is. Now, why is that important? It's because you can actually look at the shift in emotions and how that correlates, of course, with the shift in intent. Because very often, particularly when you're doing top of funnel campaigns, you are planting the seeds of future intention that you will not necessarily be able to reap or harvest even in those first 30 days. So you measure this shift to intent. Again, this is through a survey, but it has pretty good correlations with overall behavior. So now let's look at full funnel campaigns and the basic tracking that you should get out of that, and the things which you have to be tracking if you're running a full funnel campaign. So it's key that every piece of sales page for each influencer and should track all funnel metrics, particularly clicks, conversions, and order value. So again, that's clicks that an individual has when they click on a particular piece of content or the link in the description, the conversions, whether they've actually purchased, and then what the order value was, because order value, people may spend more or less depending upon which segment or category of influencer that they're coming from. You want to look at all three of those in order to calculate the measured ROI. So best practice for that is, this is super duper important because I see brands getting this wrong all the time, and it makes it almost impossible to track ROI in a really rigorous way. Give each influencer post a unique link which tracks inbound traffic. So it's not enough to give an influencer a unique link like bit.ly/ whatever the influencer's handle is. They need to have a link which has not only the influencer identified, but also the post, so you understand how well that an individual post did, and not just how well an influencer did overall, because an influencer can post their link to several posts or can just share it through other channels, which is good, but it doesn't, you want to have that additional metadata as well. You can use Bitly for this to get track clicks at leaks. GA is a campaign URL builder, and there's also a third-party service called Genius Link, which does this well. Then you want to make sure that you set up tracking through GA or your other analytics tool on all pages of a funnel to track visitors from specific posts and overall statistics. So once a visitor has clicked on a particular link from a post and then goes to your landing page, you need to make sure that you have put that little JavaScript tag from GA or whatever your analytics tracking tool is on that page, so that you can track that particular individual all the way through. And very importantly, if you're hooking them in, you can also track whether they've converted not just in that session, but within 30 days. And then once you get the revenue per your affiliate code, and then the price per affiliate code, how much you paid for that particular collaboration, then you get your tracked ROI. Now, are you ready? I hope you stayed on to this point, because I'm about to drop something amazing on you. I'm going to share with you the mind-blowing truth of the untracked majority. So remember that iceberg analogy. Well, the iceberg is a pretty apt analogy for the difference between tracked and untracked conversions. So by tracked conversions, I mean anything you can track by someone clicking through, being cookied in, and then going through and buying right there. Now, there are a lot of ways that people can convert that are untracked and untrackable. And namely, most people don't click on the link. People will see, an audience member will see a video promoting a brand or product. They'll think that's cool, that's interesting. Most often they'll just type the URL directly into a different tab. They won't go directly to your sales page. They want to check out your brand or company for themselves, or they'll just do that later. They'll think of it later, or they might click on another paid ad. All of those paths to conversion are not tracked and are really not easily trackable unless you are, for instance, Google, and you have all the data in the world, because you own most of the properties on which this happens, or Facebook. There's this untracked majority, and they are a majority. Now, how big is this majority? If you've got one person who are downloading your app based on that you can see, how many are not downloading the app? What is that multiple? It's 5x. I'm going to say that again. Or I'll let Google say it. So this is from a study that they released earlier this year. And I'm going to read this word for word. This is from a study that they did, because they actually have the data from YouTube in the Android store for downloading. They could see who downloaded an app, who viewed a video. So after investigating the post-watch user journey of more than 250 game videos, this was the game example, with over 60 million views, we compared notes with the tracking efforts of the respective developers. And they found that for every person who's clicking on the tracking link of an influencer video on YouTube, there are more than 4 people who are not clicking, but still download the game within 4 days after watching. That's just a 4-day conversion window. So this is a conservative number. But according to Google, in this study, they were seeing an untracked majority that was 4x larger than the tracked majority, which means that your influencer marketing by this is actually 5 times more valuable than your analytics are actually telling you. That's pretty freaking cool. So how can you estimate your untracked majority? So Google found that it was 5x. And that's something that we typically see. We typically see untracked majorities of plus 400%. But this can vary to just plus 25% in some cases, or it can vary to plus 1,250%. Your untracked majority can be absolutely massive. It can be over 10x. But there is a good amount of variation from client to client. So it's important before waving the flag of victory to get a sense of what is the size of your untracked majority. Now, we're not Google and you're not Google. And until we're able to solve this problem, there are some ways that you can do so right now. One way which we've used, which we've seen successful, and other of our clients have used before even working with us, is first, you want to quantify the overall sales increases in the 4 to 7 days immediately following an influencer post. Now, this only works if you don't have a ton of marketing going on immediately. If you can pause other marketing for a week while you're doing a particular post or a campaign, because it tends to be similar across all posts for a given brand, not just for a given post. look at your overall sales and look at the bump that you get in the 4 to 7 days immediately following that post or that campaign. Then filter out of your data set any content that was posted simultaneous to any major shifts in the marketing mix. So if you've got another product launch or a boost in paid social, you don't know what that boost is doing, whether that boost is from influencers or whether that boost is from something else that you did. So you want to filter out any collaborations which happened during that same period. So you've got a clean data set. And then just sum the overall revenue of these posts. How much additional money did you make through this post? What was the size of the bump? And then divide by the amount of revenue that you tracked directly through GA or your other tracking tools. From that, you'll understand what is the multiple you can apply. What is the size of your untracked majority? So this is a pretty amazing and a wonderful thing. And of course, working with us, we can help you do that. We can help you estimate your untracked majority. So exciting as that is, it's not easy. It's very hard conquering all three of these challenges, which is why so few people do it and why there are so few examples of companies that have risen off of successful influencer marketing, despite how important it is to everyone. Finding love is hard, but it's worth it. I'm pretty darn happy that I married my wife, and at least one very good thing has come of that. So all brands have these challenges, but few overcome them. Influencer selection, influencer collaboration, and ROI measurement are all complex and non-trivial. But if you can overcome them, like these brands did, well, then you'll likely join them and become a rising category leader. And all of these became category leaders pretty much from nowhere on the back of working with influence, on the back of building off of trust rather than just buying attention. So you've now got the tools. You've got the strategies to move forward. But do you have a guide? Returning to the mountaineering analogy, do you know how to use your pickaxe? Do you know how to use your rope? Are you familiar with these? Because if you're not and you try using them unskillfully, well, you won't fall down a crevasse, but you could waste a lot of time. So a little bit about us and about Tailify. That's what you would want from a guide is you'd want someone who understands psychology and data, who understands the psychology of what makes influencers successful and has the data to back that up, and who also has that psychological lens to understand how to work with influencers to get the most out of them. And then the data to be able to measure that ROI. And one of the things we of course do is we will set up the ROI measurement for you. So that's Tailify. We have the psychology, we have the data. It's one of the things which I think makes us distinct as an agency, and it's certainly the reason why I joined. And we've helped brands that are already category leaders, like Disney, brands that are already category leaders in particular in tech, like Uber, and importantly, brands that have become category leaders with us, like NordVPN, who we've been working with for the last 2 years, who has risen to become the top VPN provider in the world by a significant margin by the measure of G2, which does overall ratings of particular products in particular spaces on the basis of feedback. And could you be the next one? Well, I hope so. If you're interested in getting a guide for this particular journey to help you use your tools, please email us at sales. Regardless, thank you so much for working with us. And thank you so much for your attention at this webinar. And happy climbing, and good luck searching for love. Good luck finding the one.
Hi, Ian. We've just got a couple of questions from the chat, which I thought I could address to you.
Please do.
So Paul Spicer has asked, does the reach of the post have an impact on the untracked majority? The example from Google was on videos with 60 million views, so that's a pretty big coverage.
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. So by 60 million views, this is 60 million views in total. So 60 million views in total over all of the videos. So I'm in touch with the researchers from Google that did this, and I can ask them to find out whether there was a specific relationship between the amount of reach that a particular video got and the size of that untracked majority. But frankly, I doubt it. In fact, I would see that. Well, I would doubt it in the sense that that if you don't have enough views, you're not going to have an untracked majority, because generally what we see is that actually conversion is higher the smaller an audience is. So generally when you work with macro influencers, which have large audiences, therefore the videos have larger views, you typically see lower conversion rates. It's just the nature of it. More niche influencers have more committed and loyal audiences. We see consistently higher conversion rates. And therefore, I would imagine the untracked majority would actually be higher for influencers who have smaller amounts of views overall.
Nice.
So
Yeah, and if
helps.
you have any further questions, Paul, do get in touch with the team. Then we've got one from Sam Turner, who has asked, do you have any recommendations for free influencer research tools?
So there is a tool. So there are many tools out there. One good one is Social Data. So they have a very large influencer database. The other tools that are really useful are ones that go with particular influencer marketing platforms, so end-to-end platforms. So Creator IQ is a particularly good one. They have an influencer database of about 20 million influencers and data on all of those. And they've got pretty good search functionality as well. You can also get a lot through simply doing hashtag searches through the platforms themselves. One of the challenges that they that is a whole nother topic, which I could go into in detail, but I would say start with those two. Start with those two tools. Not to belabor the point. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but yeah. And any more detailed questions on that, please reach out.
Fantastic. That's it from questions from the audience, unless anyone has any quick last minute ones. Just so you know, you can receive a recording of this webinar, and that will be sent to you after this webinar. And if you want to book a session with our influencer experts for some strategic guidance, please do contact us. You should all have my email address from the confirmation, and we will send you up a follow-up email, of course, as well with the recording. So thank you very much, Ian, for giving us your time today. It was a really interesting session.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Esme, for facilitating. And with your remaining untracked 2 minutes, I hope you use this to relax, have a moment, reflect on what you've learned, and go into your day with more knowledge and hopefully a little bit more fun than you had before. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Bye.